It is a great honor and privilege to be here today. It's a great honor and privilege to be the Dean of Columbia College, which I really do believe is the greatest college and the greatest university and the greatest city in the world. That's actually the first sentence I ever wrote to anyone when I became Dean in 2011. And I'm really happy to be here to celebrate this magnificent occasion, the 30th anniversary of our first fully co-ed graduating class. And I think I'm supposed to say something like, it's hard to imagine Columbia College not being co-ed. Well, it's not actually, it's impossible for me to imagine because I came to Columbia in 1991 and it was already co-ed. And actually when I came as a chemistry professor from the University of California, it hadn't even occurred to me that it hadn't been co-ed forever. My interaction with students includes a lot of interaction with student leaders, many of whom are women. Most of the presidents of the Columbia College Student Council that I've dealt with in my years as dean have actually been women and very effective as presidents. 4 of the current trustees of the university are alumni of Columbia College. This is a really remarkable outcome. My wife, whom Abby referred to, who came to Columbia as a graduate student in 1972, came at a time when there was not a woman who was a member of the Board of Trustees. In fact, in 1972, there had never been a woman who was a member of the University Board of Trustees. The first trustee of Columbia who was a woman was Martha Muse, who was appointed in 1973, who was an alum of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. All of our trustees are alumni of one or more of the 17 schools that make up Columbia University. This next month in May at Class Day, our Class Day speaker will be Sheena Wright, who's she is the first woman of color to be the Class Day speaker. I was very happy when I spoke with her 2 months ago to invite her to be our Class Day speaker. There are many women in this room who have been instrumental in developing the group that is really responsible for this event, that is Columbia College Women. 5 of them, yes indeed, 5 of the founders of that organization are here. It was founded in 1991, the year I actually came. Maria Pollack, Columbia College, 87. Lisa Carnoy, Columbia College, 89. Elena Drell, Columbia College, 91. Cynthia Howells, Columbia College, 91. And Sarah Woolman, Columbia College, 92. I thank you all for creating this great organization, which does so many things. One of the most important is that it has developed the most successful mentoring effort we have in Columbia College. Alumni mentoring, former students mentoring current students, which is one of the most important activities we can propel in Columbia College, and it's an objective of our Core to Commencement Development Campaign, which, though it is a development campaign, has non-monetary, non-financial outcomes. One of them is we'd like to have every single Columbia College student have an alum as a mentor. There are a lot of things we say about ourselves to congratulate ourselves about coeducation at Columbia, and a lot of them are actually indeed congratulating ourselves. I'd like to do something different. I'd like to point out something in which our students can be congratulated for what they've done. I've spoken in this room many times before I became dean. We have each summer something called a Science Invitational, in which we invite mostly juniors in high school who have been identified various ways as being students who are going to be interested in studying science in college, and they're very strong students, and we try to recruit them. So we have Science Invitational in this room. And until I became dean, I was the person who actually gave the introductory talk for that Science Invitational. And I did that talk, prepared for that talk, by going to each of our 9 science departments, and I asked each of them to give me a little information on a current student who they viewed as outstanding and representative of real success in those departments. I also talked about faculty, but I prepared the faculty vignettes myself. I asked each department to do this, and I would ask them to send me a picture and some information about the student, about their research project, and about their future direction. The last year I did this, which was 2011, just before I became dean, all 9 science departments submitted profiles of women. This is a truly, there was no prompting. I just asked each department to send me a profile of a student. I didn't ask anything beyond that, but all 9 departments did that. Now that's a fact, all right? How we look at that fact, how we interpret that fact can be done in many different ways. To some of us, it might be, probably no one in this room, but to some people it'll be surprising because women aren't supposed to be good at science. To many people in this room, it may be received as it disproves such a stereotype. There are many ways to interpret it, but one of the ways I would like Columbia College students to interpret it is to interpret it using something I refer to as beginner's mind. Which has become a theme for my interaction with students, and I think it's an important theme for people in this room. Beginner's mind is a translation of a Zen concept called Shoshin, which is basically one of the Zen virtues, I think you could call it correctly. Beginner's mind is expressed by a quote from a book that's very influential in my life, written by Shunzuro Suzuki. The book is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And in it, in the introduction of it, he says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. If all of our students were able to embody that approach to the world, we wouldn't have to deal with countering stereotypes, because when they encounter people, they would not encounter them with assumptions, with presumptions. Being an expert, in contrast to being a beginner, means you have a collection of experiences which leads you to constrain how you engage with situations in life and how you engage with other people. The value of beginner's mind is being able to set aside the lessons of your expertise, the lessons of your life, and be able to engage with situations and with people you meet completely open to every single possibility. I have had this in the introduction to every chemistry class I've taught for at least 18 years, because I think it is the single most important virtue among scientists. I think it's the single most important attitude one can have in life in engaging other people. In terms of beginner's mind in engaging, the outcome that all 9 of the students who I profiled that year were women, beginner's mind, your surprise would be based on information theory. And information theory quantifies something called surprisal. You compare it to a random outcome. And if you compare that to a random outcome, it does become truly surprising and then requires some explanation, because the probability, the random probability of all 9 of those people, all those young people, those students, being women selected is 1 chance in 512. So the surprise of that is how unlikely that outcome is on a statistical basis, which is a way of truly recognizing the value and the significance of that, and how meaningful it is both about the students of Columbia College and about Columbia College itself and our enabling of the success of all our students. I'm now going to turn to the most pleasurable part of my remarks here at lunch, which is to introduce our keynote speaker, Nancy Weiss Malkiel, who is a distinguished scholar and academic leader at the school I usually refer to only as the P School, but here, out of recognition. There are many schools in the world. Columbia is the greatest college and the greatest university, greatest city in the world. And our aspirational peers I refer to as HYNP, but because I am introducing Nancy today, I will use its full name, Princeton, because it is a very distinguished institution. And she is a very distinguished professor of that institution, a professor of history since 1969, but also, quite remarkably, dean of the college at Princeton. It's not remarkable that she was dean. It's remarkable that she was dean for 24 years. This in dean life, in dean years is like dog years, okay? 24 is like 500 years of real time. Because the job of being dean has many, many challenges, and to be able to do that for 24 years is really a remarkable testament to one's intelligence, wisdom, persistence, perseverance, patience, and tolerance. Nancy has now embarked on the third career. She had a career as an academic historian and then a career as a dean, and now she has what I think one could call yet a third career, which is expressed in a book she has written. Her recent work involves exploring the history of coeducation, how it came to pass in the Ivy League and also at some schools in the UK. And she has, her first report of this is in a very impressive book, which has the very impressive title, Keep the Damned Women Out, the Struggle for Coeducation. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Weiss Malkiel.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I guess I'm living proof that there is life after a stint as dean forever. My job this afternoon is to look backwards and provide a larger historical context within which to understand the particular historical experience that you are celebrating today. The prelude to coeducation at Columbia was the flood of decisions for coeducation at highly prestigious colleges and universities in the United States and the United Kingdom in the period 1969 to 1974. Coeducation came all of a sudden to very traditional, very conservative institutions like Yale, Princeton, and Dartmouth. It came to men's colleges at Cambridge and Oxford, and it came to dozens of other colleges and universities as well. So why did this happen? What hurdles had to be overcome to open the doors of highly prestigious institutions to women? How well did coeducation work in its early years? And what can be learned from the fight for coeducation as we think about breaking through the barriers that women continue to face in higher education, the professions, and public life? Let's begin with why coeducation happened and why it happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Coeducation happened because it was in the strategic self-interest of institutions, all-male institutions like Princeton and Yale, in their strategic self-interest to admit women. By the late 1960s, these schools were beginning to see their applications decline along with their yields. The high school students these schools called the best boys no longer wanted to go to all-male institutions. So the key issue was the ability to continue to attract these best boys. And this is, by the way, when Harvard began to pull away from Princeton and Yale in the competition for the best high school students. Up until now, they'd really been going head-to-head among the three. And then Harvard, which had Radcliffe up the street, began to beat Princeton and Yale at a game they thought they knew and didn't like losing. Coeducation then became the means for places like Princeton and Yale to shore up a first-rate applicant pool and enrolled student body. It was not the result of a high-minded moral commitment to educating women. It was not a matter of a mission to educate women. It was not the result of deep thinking about how to educate women. Rather, it was about what women could do for previously all-male institutions. about how women would help these schools renew their hold on the best boys. Women, in other words, played the instrumental role of improving the educational experience of men. And so it's not really surprising that going co-ed did not always well serve the women who were admitted to the early co-ed classes. A related point, which may be unexpected, the protagonists in this story are men. Save for Polly Bunting, Mary Ingraham Bunting, the president of Radcliffe, every strategist, every decision maker, everyone leading the charge for coeducation was male. Coeducation then resulted not from organized efforts by women activists, but from strategic decisions taken by powerful men. So why did coeducation happen when it did? Changes in application patterns were certainly a trigger, but the larger context of the 1960s set the stage. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the student movement, the women's movement. By the end of the 1960s, colleges and universities looked quite different than they had at the beginning of the decade. The composition of student bodies began to change to include a large number of public school students, as well as students from less advantaged families, Catholic students, Jewish students, even some African American students. So in a way, admitting women followed logically. As well, men and women students in the 1960s demonstrated together, protested together, registered black voters together. Not going to school together seemed increasingly outmoded. And all of this, of course, bears on why high school students changed their minds about the attractiveness of all-male schools. Princeton and Yale were the prime movers in this process. Everyone else was watching and taking cues from them. They were driven by the forces that I've just described, especially admissions, but they were also acting in direct competition with one another. And everything each school did was done looking at the other. Yale was courting Vassar, trying to persuade Vassar to move to New Haven. Bob Goheen, the president of Princeton, went up to Sarah Lawrence to try to persuade Sarah Lawrence to study moving to Princeton, an unlikelier combination. Because of Yale-Vassar, Goheen asked the Princeton board for authorization to conduct a serious data-driven analytic study of the desirability and feasibility of coeducation at Princeton. And that study was carried out by Gardner Patterson, an economist on the faculty of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. The Patterson report arrived in New Haven in September of 1968 when it became public. Now, by this time, Vassar had said no to Yale, and Kingman Brewster had said in November of 1967, when that happened, that what Yale would do was to explore opening its own coordinate college for women. He thought about it, some mused about it, wrote about it, but didn't really do anything about it. So the Patterson report arrived in New Haven. Brewster read it and realized that Princeton might be serious about coeducation. And within 2 months, he had the Yale Corporation and the Yale faculty voting in favor of coeducation. They did that in November of 1968, with the women to arrive in September of 1969. Well, at this point, Princeton, in its deliberate, process-driven fashion, was still talking about the Patterson report with groups of alumni around the country. The Princeton trustees voted in January of 1969 to approve coeducation in principle and told Goheen to come back later when he was ready to tell them how he wanted to do it. And he did that in late April of 1969. Remember that Yale at this point had read applications from women and was sending out letters of admission. Now, if the Princeton trustees had acted in Princeton style, they would have decided in late April of 1969 to admit women for the fall of 1970. Lots of time to plan and get organized, but they couldn't do that because women were coming to Yale in September of 1969. So in late April of 1969, the Princeton trustees approved coeducation for September of 1969. I'll turn next to the hurdles that had to be overcome to open the doors of these institutions to women. No matter which institution we're talking about, it would be difficult to overestimate how tough it was to make coeducation happen. There was fierce opposition from alumni as well as significant resistance from many faculty and students. As for alumni, start with the title of my book, Keep the Damned Women Out. It comes from a 1970 letter from a Dartmouth alumnus to the chair of the Dartmouth trustees. He wrote, "For God's sake, for Dartmouth's sake, and for everyone's sake, keep the damned women out." Consider an example from Yale. When the Yale Corporation first opined publicly on the education of undergraduate women, one alumnus responded this way: "There is a glory to tradition. I think of the girl-filled weekend, the cocktail party, the dances, the plays, the big football game. Then there is the adventure of journeying to the girls' colleges. And gentlemen," he said, "let's face it, charming as women are, they get to be a drag if you are forced to associate with them each and every day. Think of the poor student," he continued, "who has a steady date. He wants to concentrate on the basic principles of thermodynamics, but she keeps trying to gossip about all the idiotic trivia all women try to impose on men." Consider some examples from Princeton. One alumnus wondered why this death wish on the part of Princeton. If women were admitted, he said, no doubt a very fine school would emerge, but Princeton University would be lost forever. Another alumnus said that coeducation would dilute Princeton's sturdy masculinity with disconcerting mini-skirted young things cavorting on its playing fields. Still another alumnus put it this way: "What is all this nonsense about admitting women to Princeton? A good old-fashioned whorehouse would be considerably more efficient and much, much cheaper." As for faculty, some were supportive, some were opposed, but virtually everyone put the newly admitted women students on the spot by asking for the woman's point of view, no matter whether the course was in literature or psychology, where such a view might have been relevant, or in math or physics, where it certainly wasn't. I would put that in the category of bumbling but relatively innocent faculty behavior, but not all faculty behavior could be described that way. Consider the art history professor at Dartmouth who posted slides of nudes on the screen, running his hand up and down their thighs, or the oceanography professor who posted pictures of sea creatures, shrimp, lobster, squid, and naked women. Or consider the response of the chair of the history department at Yale when he was asked by a woman student at the outset of coeducation if he would consider offering a course in women's history. He said, "That would be like teaching the history of dogs." Students were not always much better about welcoming their female classmates. Male students often told their female counterparts that they really didn't belong on their campuses. Dartmouth offers the most striking examples of bad behavior. Dartmouth men hung banners from dormitory windows declaring no co-eds, co-eds go home. They shouted out numbers meant as ratings of attractiveness as women students entered the dining hall, as if they were rating the quality of a dive. Fraternities delighted in and got away with drunken, degrading, dangerous behaviors and scurrilous verbal assaults on women students. My favorite Dartmouth story comes from the third year of coeducation. Dartmouth had then, perhaps still does, a competition among the fraternities who would compose and perform original songs. So in this third year of coeducation, the winning song was called Our Quahogs, 10 verses of outrageously insulting sexualized attacks on women. And quahog was a highly derogatory nickname for Dartmouth women. The judge of the competition was the dean of the college. And he chose Our Quahogs as the year's most original submission, and he joined the fraternity members in an exuberant public rendition of the song. So let's turn finally to the question of what can be learned from the fight for coeducation as we think about breaking through the barriers that women continue to face in higher education, the professions, and public life. I'm going to focus on higher education. Many of you know more than I do about barriers in the professions, and I find this a particularly dispiriting time to talk about barriers to women in public life. The first thing to say is that the fight for coeducation shows us that institutional change is really hard to accomplish, and that it is more likely to happen when it is in the clear interest of the men who run the institutions. In other words, protesting or storming the barricades probably won't get you there. My second point is that coeducation actually accomplished a lot, but at the same time, there is a lot that it did not accomplish and could not have been expected to accomplish. As for what coeducation accomplished, as I say in my book, the one incontrovertible point is that coeducation has opened educational opportunities for women that had not previously existed. Being able to attend previously all-male colleges has given women access to a broader range of educational opportunities. Women now have full access, as men do, to the best university education in the Anglo-American world, to faculty members at the cutting edge of their respective disciplines, as well as to the best libraries, laboratories, and other educational facilities. And women students have the opportunity to profit from the intellectual stimulation and interchange, as well as the social interactions fostered in mixed-sex educational environments. Going to school together means learning to live and work together. And in the early 21st century, most college-bound students see coeducational environments as more normal than environments segregated by sex. But then comes the but. And in any major social change, it is usually the case that there is a but. If we consider the impact of coeducation on colleges and universities, the first point to be made is that coeducation did not mean revolution. Women were added to the mix, but the institutions themselves proved to be remarkably durable, and women generally accepted or embraced traditions rather than upending them. In the United States and the United Kingdom, women were included, assimilated, and accepted. Colleges and universities were flexible enough to accommodate them, but not so flexible that the institutions became unrecognizable compared with their former selves. The second important point is that coeducation accompanied but did not cause more profound social transformations in these colleges and universities. By that I mean diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. Elite education in the late 1960s became less aristocratic and more democratic or meritocratic, but that happened in parallel with, not because of, coeducation. For all the gains realized through coeducation, I think it's important to be clear about what coeducation has not done, and I think should not have been expected to do. Coeducation has not resolved the long-standing complexities in the relations between men and women. To be explicit, sexual harassment and sexual assault are no more under control after more than 4 decades of coeducation than they were when men and women first started going to college together. Coeducation has not resolved the perplexingly gendered behaviors and aspirations of female students. The Columbia student government notwithstanding, there are many places where women students are still not represented in major leadership positions in proportion to their share of the student population. Coeducation has not resolved the conundrum of gendered fields of study, especially, again, the example Dean Valentini gave notwithstanding, but especially the underrepresentation of undergraduate women in such fields as computer science, economics, math, and physics. Nor has coeducation balanced the highly skewed gender patterns among college and university faculty members and graduate students. And coeducation has certainly not ensured that women alumni can expect professional careers that parallel those of men. Despite the ample supply of female graduates of highly prestigious, previously all-male institutions, women continue to face challenges in finding leadership positions and professional advancement, and pressing issues remain in the area of work-family balance. In short, while we celebrate, we should remind ourselves that coeducation at the most elite colleges and universities did not solve and could not have been expected to solve persistently challenging personal and social issues that continue to have a profound influence on opportunities as well as gender relations in American society. Thank you very much, and I'd be delighted to hear your questions. Yes.
I had the opportunity to attend a conversation between Anita Hill and Helen Powell 3 days ago in San Francisco, and there was discussion about sexual harassment. And there was discussion about sexual harassment in the workplace, obviously. But Anita Hill made the comment that we needed to look further upstream and look at the discrepancy in the opportunities that are even afforded at the university level or when students are still in school. And she talked about and cited some statistics about the lack of opportunity, even if you look at opportunity to be placed in a lab with a Nobel scientist for a graduate student, and how more of those opportunities are still given to men versus women. And I was just wondering if you could speak about that, if you had done any research or had any thoughts on that and kind of that transition or that bridge between the coeducational process and university and how that filters into the workplace.
I think that once women students are in the mix, they, at least to the best of my knowledge, they have the same opportunities as men. So if there is a woman physicist or economist, let's start with undergraduates at Princeton, she has just as much chance of writing her senior thesis with a Nobel Prize winner as a man does. And if there are women graduate students in the department, they have just as much chance of working in a Nobel Prize winner's lab. The problem is that there are too few women in those fields to produce those outcomes. And I think, if you look at the studies that were done at Duke in the early 1990s, at Princeton a half dozen years ago, of patterns of leadership, academic and non-academic leadership among women undergraduates, years after coeducation, that there should still be issues about whether women students aspire to the highest leadership positions or think maybe they don't belong there, about whether women think that there are gendered fields of study, that these should still be problems decades after coeducation is really dispiriting. And I think that's the sort of thing that feeds into what you're talking about.
Hi, thank you for that. Madeline Villanueva, class of 87. And my question is related to a comment I had heard earlier today from Valerie Purdy-Vans, where one of the observations made is that it seems that we women ourselves sort of help promote some of the stereotypes and some of the views, and you did mention that there hasn't been change in relation in some social aspects after coeducation. I'm wondering how much of that may be due to the fact that we ourselves sort of raise our boys to be this way, we ourselves embrace the stereotypes?
It's a very complicated process. In part, the issue is what do women expect, think they're entitled to, and demand. And some of what women are demanding is gendered, and instead of being exactly the same as what men are demanding. The notion that women would think that you really don't belong in math or physics if you're a woman, that's crazy. But that's a gendered assumption that's partly having to do with how women are raised. Partly it has to do with what men convey about what's appropriate for women. And you get that from your peers when you're an undergraduate, you get it from faculty members. And then, in terms of professional schools are doing a lot better than they used to, but there's a distance still to go. And as far as the professions are concerned, you know better than I do about how challenging it is to make your way, and sometimes you do it with the support of your male colleagues, and sometimes you do it in opposition to your male colleagues. And some of what we're trained to do and assume as women sometimes works well, sometimes works less well in our efforts to move forward.
The microphone.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Nancy Friedman's 87. I'm curious as to whether or not you think that secondary school education, single sex for boys and for girls, is still relevant and important.
I think single sex education is still relevant and important in many contexts. And I think at secondary school level, there are a lot of good reasons at various stages to separate girls and boys and nurture their particular development in ways that will prove beneficial in the long run. I still believe in women's colleges as a serious and credible alternative for some population of women students. I think that's healthy to have alternatives in higher education as well. I still believe that women's colleges are places where women are the principal business of the faculty. Doesn't always happen in our universities, where there are no gendered assumptions about what women do and don't study, where all the leadership positions are held by women, where women are being schooled to be leaders in their professions and communities. That isn't to say that this sort of thing doesn't happen at Princeton and Columbia, but for a population of women students having the opportunity to do that in a single-sex setting, I think is a good thing. But it's a vanishing breed. At the secondary school and elementary school level, I think we're going toward sex-segregated education at the university and college level, we're going away from it. I think we've come, there's a question over there. Say it loudly. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to need you to say that with a microphone, because I didn't get it all.
All right, sorry. Is it your sense that women who have achieved leadership positions in those institutions have made a difference in the culture of those institutions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, does it matter that Drew Faust is president of Harvard, that Shirley Tillman was president of Princeton, that Ruth Simmons was president of Brown, and now Chris Paxson is, that Amy Gottman is president of Penn? Do those things matter to the culture of the place, the opportunities for women? Absolutely, they matter. Can you totally transform an institution just by having women in a position of major leadership? You can't. I mean, look at the fact that Drew Faust today at Harvard is still fighting the single-sex final clubs. That's kind of crazy in 2017 for the president of, probably, with all respect to Columbia, probably the most prestigious university in the country, not to be able to change something fundamental like that. So there are limits to what women can do, but I think having women in positions of major leadership makes a big difference. That it matters whether an academic department doing a search for a faculty member includes women in the pool. It's more likely to happen, when a woman is president or dean of the faculty. It may be more likely to happen than when the people in charge are all men. It sounds like, no, it doesn't sound like, it looks like it's the end of the Q&A, and I thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyra Tirana, Columbia College class of 1987. My bio is in the pamphlets as the former president of the Columbia College Alumni Association, first alumna to do so. I hope most of you are all familiar with me. Quick addition to my bio, which wasn't in that blurb, is I was a urban studies major at Columbia, went on to 10 years of work in transportation and public policy, which was actually a pretty male-dominated field. And then I took time off to raise my 3 kids. My daughter Olivia is going to graduate in May, and got involved in my community as a volunteer, which led to a lot of not-for-profit work, including getting back involved in Columbia because I had the time and my children were old enough to do that.
I'm Mischel Eisner. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and so much of what Claire and Wanda shared with us this morning and so much of what our keynote speaker shared with us really resonated with me as it relates to my bio, which I'll give some color to. I came to the college in '83 determined to study computer science, and that is what I did. So I was a computer science major in the college, which was quite rare at the time. Upon graduation, I became a quantitative analyst at Salomon Brothers in the days that Michael Lewis wrote about in Liar's Poker. And there was, in fact, a stripper that came to our quantitative analyst training class when somebody was engaged to be married. So those were very different times. Michael Lewis left in '88. He was disillusioned. I left in '89 and decided to pursue a law degree, which I did at Yale Law School. And when I came out, I practiced for a few years. I practiced tax law, and then I spent much of my career working in federal district court in Brooklyn Heights, drafting opinions and doing justice, as I like to say, for a judge there. About 3.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to come back to the university and serve here as the Director of Special Projects, which I have been delighted to do. So Kyra, let me ask you, for starters, why did you decide to come and be part of the first class of women here?
I had been at a boarding school, and I had actually committed to go to another school and had gotten into Columbia. And my English teacher at the time was the first class of women at Yale. And I was talking to her about this dilemma I was having, because it was kind of a surprise to get into Columbia and to consider it. And she said, you know, whatever happens, whether it's a good experience, a bad experience, this is the only opportunity. It's a really rare experience that you're going to have, and it's never going to be replicated again. The second piece of it that happened, my dorm counselor and advisor was among the first faculty members at Andover. So I had been in a previously all-male institution that had merged about 10 years before I got there. And what really stuck with me was her experience. The first graduation she marched in, and everybody was in their navy blue suits. She was 8 months pregnant. She wore all pink. And so I thought, you know, I was just going to take that chance. And I think that my experience to that point hadn't made it seem that, you know, it was like, you know, why not? Let me try something new. Let me get out there and do that. And because I'd been in an institution, it didn't seem to me that it was going to be that different. So I kind of came into it blindly on that sense. And it did work out, I think, very well. And we'll go into hopefully a little bit more of that experience. Talk maybe a minute, Linda, if you could tell me a little bit more about your experience when you got here and into the classroom, and you know, particularly how it felt to be in that first class.
Sure. So I would say that my experience in the classroom overall, I think, was fantastic. Like so many things about the college that are special. I think that the core curriculum made being a woman in the first class extraordinarily special, because the college had done such a fantastic job of making the first class almost 50-50. I believe it was 45% women. And so having the core as the classes we sort of all marched through together, I think really created an instantaneous feeling of comfort in the classroom at being here, even though we were the first women as part of the college. I would say also, you know, I didn't get the memo that computer science was a male-gendered field, so I certainly did have the experience at that time that most of my classes that were in my field of study were for sure dominated by men, and also mostly through the School of Engineering. And not to age myself, but when I first became interested in computer science, I programmed with punch cards before I came to the university, and girls definitely didn't code. But I had parents who were dedicated academics, and I think I'm one of 3 girls, and they always raised us to think that whatever our area of interest was, we should pursue it. And so it didn't really occur to me to factor those things into what I pursued. And my mother was one of the first women to be granted a PhD by Harvard instead of Radcliffe, and that was something that was sort of ever present in our home, partly because of the joke that she hung her PhD over our washing machine. But nevertheless, we treated it as a joke. And it was just very much the environment that we could do anything we wanted to do.
I think we didn't know when we got here, and I know there are a lot of people from 87, I think you didn't know any better or didn't know any different. Like, you knew you were coming into something momentous, but you're 17, 18 years old. You're just living your life. You're getting up, you know, every day, and you're going to class, and there are lots of women on campus, and I didn't feel like there was any animosity or anything different. I think there was, you know, I actually found it more, you know, when I'm president of the Alumni Association, the class of, I think it's 61, has a regular lunch, and I went to go meet with them. And they said, what did it feel like to be a woman at the college? And I'm like, I was 18. I mean, I didn't know, you know, you didn't know any different. It felt like I was going to college. It was great. It was fun. It was interesting. I was meeting, you know, lots of new people. And I think some of that innocence and I think was very helpful at that time. And there were a lot of women on campus already, so I don't think it was a huge surprise. I mean, I think it does percolate up in other ways in the experience when you kind of dive down into it, and I think some kind of funny ways.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, we had talked about athletics. I was pretty involved in, you know, athletics, and I was actually a squash player. I'd stopped playing soccer my senior year in high school, and I got here in the squash team. It was a club sport. It was all men, and I was having a lot of fun, but it was hard to kind of, I was trying to, sort of the natural thing, well, of course, I think we were also like, we had to make up what we wanted to do when we got here. So I wanted to play squash, and I was running around putting up signs and trying to put together a squash team because, you know, it didn't exist, and there were a group of women that were putting together the soccer team, and I just pivoted. You know, I went back to soccer and played and, you know, got together with them, and we founded the first soccer team. And so I think, you know, a lot of people, you know, had to do that. I lived on the floor, and I was talking last night with some of the women. The swim team, they created that the first year of Columbia. There were 8 of them, 8 recruited athletes. There were a couple walk-ons, and they swam every race. They swam multiple races. I mean, now a team has, you know, dozens of people on it training, but, you know, you didn't know any better. You got in and you did it, and I think somebody said earlier today, you know, you were competing. We weren't always winning, but we were having a great time, and I think in some ways it was a great experience because there were no limits, there were no expectations. You know, I think you just got out there and did it and pursued it on that front.
And can you tell me a little bit about how you think your experience here in athletics and your experience overall impacted the rest of your life? And you've done a lot of things in sports and are the U.S. Team lead for women's wrestling. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I sort of just fell into it. I think, you know, when I talk about when I started staying home with my kids, and it actually with, you know, my daughter, she started playing soccer at the same time as her younger brother, and there was a whole teams and coaches and everything, and she shows up for first game and there's no coach and there's no, you know, there are not enough kids on the team, and I was like, well, that's not right, and ran around and found people to do that and got involved in my community. And I think that experience of being here at Columbia when, you know, the decision was made quickly and slowly, and they weren't fully prepared. We had to do, it was also the time of era in education, we had to do a lot of stuff by ourselves. You wanted it to happen, you made it happen. You know, you wanted to figure out your major. We didn't really have a great, you know, the strongest advising system at the time. We got together in a room with people who were also interested in being that major, and we figured out what it was and how to do it and, you know, how to make it. So I think it was that attitude, and I landed in the wrestling through my husband and learned that there's girls wrestling, and there, you know, about 15,000 girls around the country wrestling now, but it's an Olympic sport, but only 5 states recognize it. And I think that attitude, well, this isn't right, and why can't we have it? And what I learned at Columbia is you just get out there and make it happen if you want to make it happen. And I think Columbia at the time was very, very receptive to us. You know, if you want to start a soccer team, sure, you know, and they played a little catch up. The first year we were up at Baker Field, we practiced on the baseball field down below, and the football team would finish practice early, and the buses would leave because they forgot that there were, you know, 15 girls down on the baseball field practicing. You know, the visiting team would come. There was no locker room. You know, there was that same bathroom in the field house with 2 stalls and an ante room, and we'd give the other team first, you know, and they'd change, and then we'd go into there, and we didn't even consider us that maybe you're supposed to shower right after the game. I mean, it wasn't an option. That's just what we did. The next year there was a locker room. So there was a lot of catch up, and I think sometimes Columbia was going first, and sometimes we, the students, you know, were going first. Mm-hmm. And it was a great, you know, I think it set an attitude and a way of going about it, and, you know, I've certainly enjoyed, you know, been the recipient of that going through. Let me ask, you know, when we were, you know, actually Linda and I didn't know each other when we were here at Columbia, even in the same class, and we had a lot of fun in the prep call for today, getting to know each other. And I think it's very interesting, sort of, you have a little 30-year bookend, right, so to speak, that, you know, you were here as an undergraduate and you left for a long time. And then the last few years you've been back, you know, in, you know, the president's office with a very broad view of Columbia. What brought you, why did you come back, and how do you think it's changed from that kind of larger perspective?
Well, I think that, not to keep harping on the core, but I think that the core really made me feel in my career like I had the grounding to pursue whatever it is I wanted to pursue. So when I decided to go to law school, I felt like there was no reason, despite the fact that I hadn't been sort of a typical political science or English or history major, that I shouldn't pursue that. And I think that every choice I've made along the way in my career I've always felt like having the educational grounding I had set me up to do whatever it is I wanted. And so I think that, you know, it's been a longstanding desire of mine to find a way to be engaged in higher education. I come from a long line of academics, and that wasn't something I chose to do in terms of faculty. So as we sort of, you know, as you sort of move through the cycles of life and the different phases of your career, it became something that I thought, you know, this is something I really want to do. And so when the opportunity came up for me to work here, I came running. And it's been fantastic to be here. I have a completely different view of the university. It's such a much bigger place and such a much more complicated place than I ever realized as a college student, which I think is exactly as it should be. And I think that, I think it also is just a vastly different place than it was when we started. I think, as Dean Valentini said, it's the greatest school and the greatest university in the greatest city, and that's really become true. I was doing a little, you know, homework in preparation for this, and I looked into the U.S. News and World Report rankings, which, you know, we all look at sometimes, especially as we become the age of parents who are going on to schools. And I was startled to learn that the rankings began in 1983, which is just when we came here. And not to compare to peers, but, you know, we're always talking about what Harvard, Princeton, and Yale are doing. But at the time, Columbia was ranked 15th, and Stanford was ranked 1st. And as it turns out, this year, Stanford and Columbia share the spot for 5th, which is right behind Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and now University of Chicago. So I just find it, I do think that when you look at the university overall and what the college-going co-ed has done for Columbia as an institution, I think it just was the beginning of it catapulting into you know, a world-class institution in a whole new way.
I think you know, as being involved in the Alumni Association, having that, you know, I do notice also, I think over the years, that the college has really become much more front and center. And, you know, as a part of the university, I think the university was much more distant. I felt when we were here, we never looked at that, you know, through that prism. And it wasn't something we related to, and maybe part of it was the tussle that they were having about, do they become, you know, when are they going to go coeducation? Are they going to go, you know, there was that kind of conflict internally, which kind of played out, and you could feel that in some ways as a student, that the college and on the ground level, it was very welcoming. The institution had a little bit more struggles with the university. I mean, that's something that I felt as a student, that now as a parent and as an active alumnus, I don't find that same sense of conflict between the two. Mm-hmm. So we're now getting the sign that it's time to end.